In part 1 of this video series, we examine the psychology of Jujutsu Kaisen's main characters through a Jungian perspective, equating the dichotomy between humans and curses to concepts of the persona and shadow. We then began to examine the central conflict of the series, the war between humans and curses, using Friedrich Nietzsche's views of master and slave morality as a point of reference. Through these 4 experiments, we were able to conclude that Jujutsu Kaisen is a story that pits personal desires and impulses against societal norms and morals through the medium of curses. A true curse is a being that embodies their shadow and acts in a way that satisfies their id. Born from negative emotions, these curses are extensions of primal, unrestricted human desire. Some believe that this manifestation of humanity is evolution acting to create stronger, more ambitious creatures, whereas others posit that curses are a primitive step back that should be eradicated. Mahito is a character obsessed with self-actualization and evolution, signified by the malleable structure of his body and soul. The disaster curses he allied himself with believed in his ability to change the world into one dominated by curses, and even Nanami shows great fear in his potential. Had Mahito not been defeated by Yuji and Shibuya, it would be hard to imagine just how dangerous he would have become. I say would be hard to imagine because, luckily, Jujutsu Kaisen presents us with the exact model for what someone like Mahito could have grown into. Ryomen Sukuna embodies the truest form of what a curse is, hence why he can claim the title of their king without ever interacting with his kind. He embodies his shadow unconditionally, even manifesting himself as the shadows of others. He is entirely self-serving and will use his strength to satisfy any impulse he may feel. He is sadistic, narcissistic, and domineering. What makes Sukuna's character even more fascinating is that we learn early on that Sukuna was not born as a curse, but as a human. One that became so twisted and detached from humanity, he ceased to be part of their species. In essence, he had evolved beyond his human connections, becoming known as the Fallen by other sorcerers from his era. In Nietzsche's 1883 book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none, Nietzsche writes about how after moving away from religious beliefs and morals, humanity must seek to evolve their sense of self in search of a new meaning of life. Nietzsche called this form of evolution the Ubermensch, otherwise known as the Overman or Superman. The Ubermensch disregards outward societal pressures, seeking to find new morals that affirm the material world around them. Whereas most religious or spiritual beliefs posit the material as shallow and a stepping stone to a greater living, the Ubermensch does not seek ascension to a higher plane, and instead seeks joy in their current life. Ryomen Sukuna, having evolved from his prior state as a human, embodies the characteristics of the Ubermensch as the king of curses. Firstly, Sukuna bears a lot of strength. Not just physical strength or strength in the form of cursed energy, but emotional and philosophical strength as well. Throughout the series, as both humans and curses suffer events that shake their core beliefs and values, Sukuna remains still as a rock surrounded by tumultuous waves. Characters frequently seek to debate him or barter with him, but Sukuna does not yield to anyone. Sukuna's rebellious nature also ties into the status of the Ubermensch. If there were one way to easily get on Sukuna's bad side, it would be to attempt to govern or restrict his actions. Sukuna is quick to resort to violence against any authority figure, having been feared in the Heian era for his slaughtering of thousands of Jujutsu sorcerers, and even decapitating Mimiko and Nanako for attempting to buy his services with one of his fingers. This is why Sukuna despises Yuji so much. Not just because Sukuna acts as Yuji's repressed shadow, or because Yuji's cog mentality is an insult to the Ubermensch's ideals, but because Yuji restricts his autonomy, and forces Sukuna to be a passenger for most of the series. Freedom and independence are craved by the Ubermensch, hence why Sukuna seeks a new vessel that can embrace their shadow and restore his identity. Lastly, the Ubermensch carries a deep love for the material world through the creation of their own meaning of life. Sukuna, despite being undeniably evil, may be the most joyful character in the series. When interacting with those who Sukuna identifies as strong, Sukuna is willing to push himself not just to defeat his opponent, but to understand them on both a cursed energy and emotional level. We see this in the speech he delivers to Jogo after defeating him with his own fire, and also during his fight against Satoru Gojo, in which he spends the entire fight attempting to find an answer to completely bypassing infinity. In other words, he tears down the barrier between Satoru and the rest of the world using his world-cutting slash, and he wholeheartedly congratulates Satoru for pushing him as far as he did. Sukuna also appreciates those who are weak as a means to satiate his hunger by cooking and eating them with his cursed techniques. By satisfying his hunger, Sukuna finds enlightenment and satisfaction and lives on a separate plane from humans and curses, being feared and revered by both. Ryomen and Sukuna conquered an era where Jujutsu was believed to be at its strongest, and in the modern world where humans and curses alike share and express altruistic or malicious ideals, Sukuna is the only one to show an unshakable will. When Sukuna finally transforms into his true form, special grade sorcerer Hajime Kashimo marvels at just how ideal his body is for Jujutsu. In pretty much every facet that determines success within the world of Jujutsu sorcery, Sukuna be said to be perfection, and, under Nietzsche's philosophy, as the Ubermensch, Sukuna can be seen as the final destination of humans who wield the strength to evolve.
Packs of humans, packs of curses. All of you get together and measure your worth against each other, driving all of you to grow weaker and stunted. You really should have just burnt everything down to a cinder without giving it a thought. Casting aside race, future, everything, until you finally reached Satoru Gojo. That hunger to seize your ideals, that's what you were truly lacking.
Anyone who embodies the Ubermensch is strong, but not everyone who is strong embodies the Ubermensch. When speaking to Jogo in his final moments, Sukuna explains the limitations that prevented Jogo from evolving as he did. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche proposed the 3 stages of metamorphosis that would allow a strong person to transform their spirit into that of the Ubermensch. The first stage is the camel, a creature that boasts strength yet is confined to a particular purpose. Jogo and the other disaster curses, despite possessing special grade power, limited themselves to using that power to become the new humans. Their conviction to merely displace humanity in a system of order restricted them, and their focus on others' perception of them meant they could never grasp their full potential. Jogo, despite being one of the most powerful characters in the series, is shown to be pathetic in the face of the strongest human and curse respectively, symbolising how the war between the two fractions has imprisoned his own ego. Jujutsu society as a whole is also stuck in a perpetual camel-like state. We see primarily through the eyes of the Zenin and Kamo clans that the upper classes of Jujutsu society are highly rigid and conform to arbitrary self-imposed restrictions. They base their hierarchy on cursed techniques, family ties, and even sex in a vacuum without considering individualistic qualities. Maki Zenin, despite boasting potential equal to or even above most of the Zenin clan, is discriminated against due to her heavenly restriction and her sex. Naoya Zenin, the pure embodiment of this oppression, boasts an extreme superiority complex due to him being raised in an environment that taught him that his technique and biological sex in of themselves were incredible. Naoya, whilst being strong, is still restricted by an environment that tells him that he's already perfect in spite of his naive, narcissistic personality. His perception of being born better than others is shown for his ventral spirit's domain expansion being a uterus, symbolising not only the control he feels he has over the women he discriminates against, but also the fixation he has on that control. However, in spite of all his strength, Maki is still able to beat him due to a loophole in the interaction between domain expansions and her heavenly restriction. A woman born with no cursed energy becomes strong in a way that Naoya could have never even dreamed of, by casting aside the same laws that he perpetuated and stagnated within. Therefore, Naoya, as well as the rest of the Zenin clan, were destined to be destroyed by her calamity. The Jujutsu higher-ups are perhaps the most overt example of the camel in the series. Most people see their goal to execute Yuji as morally arguable, as Yuji's lack of control over Sukuna shown during the Shibuya incident puts the lives of innocent people at risk. However, in the few scenes that we are shown or told about the higher-ups, the sinister nature in which they are painted leads me to believe that their desire to annihilate Sukuna is more rooted in self-preservation. Sukuna is a primal force that bent Jujutsu society to his will during the Heian era, and he has been shown to be just as dominant in the modern age. The Jujutsu higher-ups, in both their support of the 3 clans and their distaste for Satoru Gojo, are highly conservative and reluctant to change, likely as any shifts in the paradigm would result in their own loss of power. The higher-ups rely on lackeys such as Gakuganji or Yuta to achieve their goals, as the system allows them to wield material power in an indirect, arbitrary way. The Jujutsu higher-ups would never grow strong or fight for themselves, as they don't need to, and actions such as pursuing Yuji's execution or criminalizing the release of Satoru Gojo are taken in order to retain their comfort at the top of the hierarchy. As Kenjaku begins to break down the boundaries of Jujutsu Society via the Culling game, the power of the higher-ups is eventually nullified, and Satoru Gojo, a man whose strength is tangible and material, is able to annihilate them. Talented Jujutsu sorcerers and cursers tend to start off as camels, and through either a lack of desire to seek perfection or a belief that they've already found it, they stagnate, letting themselves be caged by adherence to outside influence. However, as Sukuna proves to Jogo, stagnation in this cage will ultimately lead to annihilation at the hands of those who seek to push further beyond their limits. Only by choosing to burn it all away without a second thought can someone cease to be a camel and progress to the next stage of evolution. The camel's transformation into the lion signifies a change in their use of strength from serving the pre-established systems around them to outright rebelling against them. The lion is an antagonizing figure that seeks revolution against any conceivable bounds, developing an unbridled desire to serve the self. We see Mahito undergo this metamorphosis when he finds his true shape of his soul against Yuji, forsaking the greater purpose of the disaster curses and the human curse conflict in order to seek satisfaction by killing his rival. Maki Zenin, someone who had lived their whole life oppressed by the upper echelon of her clan, is only able to fight back against them after disregarding everything dear to her. This not only included the attachments to those who she resented, but also the people that she loved dearly. By letting go of her connection to Mai, Maki successfully burns everything away, doing what Toji could not, and finally ending the curse of the Zenin. The metamorphosis of Japan following Kenjaku's use of idol transfiguration provokes the weeding out of those who stagnated as camels, allowing the Culling game to essentially become a den of lions who compete for territories and push the boundaries of cursed energy. Kinji Hakari is a young man who made the transformation from a camel to a lion before the paradigm shift, earning him and Kirara expulsion from Jujutsu Tech. Unlike the higher-ups who sought comfort through arbitrary systems, Kinji is captivated by the material thrill of gambling. Instead of wishing to achieve success through the conventional means of an honest job, Kinji takes the deviant path forward, starting a fight club in which people can enjoy the thrill of primitive, strength-based competition, alongside the risk of betting on the winner. Kinji enjoys gambling because he believes that true happiness cannot exist without ample loss. In other words, you cannot win if there's no chance for you to lose. In order to seek this thrill, Kinji had to rebel against the rigidity of Jujutsu Society and even the law to find his own pathway to happiness, which he calls the fever. The use of the word fever to describe Kinji's fixation is notable due to the fever's relationship with heat. Kinji's pursuit of the fever is essentially him choosing to burn it all away, as Sukuna put it to Jogo. For one final example in the Culling game, we can look at Hiromi Higuruma, a defense attorney turned awakened curse user whose experience in the justice system caused him to grow resentful towards humanity as a whole. Hiromi's act of rebellion is his aimless killing spree at the beginning of the Culling games, accumulating points he had no desire to use and simply taking out his anger against the flawed systems that he tried to succeed within. When embodying the lion, a person finally chooses to forsake the comfort of whatever system binds them, instead choosing to burn it away in pursuit of perfection. If the King of Curses acts as a perfect analogue for Nietzsche's Ubermensch, can the same be said for the honoured one among humans? Satoru Gojo's birth caused a paradigm shift in the world of Jujutsu. It bent Jujutsu Society around him, forced curses into hiding, and spurred an evolution in cursed energy just to keep up with this new superior being. Whilst every other character I've talked about so far has evolved or stagnated in response to systems out of control, Satoru has shaped the very systems he resides in. We see during his backstory that Satoru had a high potential to use his power selfishly against the people he disagreed with. Had Suguru Geto not instilled in him the value of having a reason to enact violence on others, Satoru could have become a calamity capable of destroying the world. Humans, Jujutsu sorcerers, cursed spirits. All other beings are chained and restricted by the world they are born in. But Satoru Gojo was born as being the world orbited, one with equal capability to create and destroy. In essence, Satoru had the qualities of the Ubermensch from birth. The third and final metamorphosis of the spirit described by Nietzsche, synonymous with the Ubermensch, is the child. This stage of the spirit sees a person gain a sense of innocence and oblivion to the suffering around them, freeing themselves of the need to both abide by and rebel against the world around them, and instead allowing their life to be guided by their own personal material urges. This state of being bears a remarkable resemblance to the feeling Satoru experiences during his rematch with Toji. Satoru, not even feeling the pain of Riko Amanai's death anymore, declares himself the Honoured One in a state of euphoria, finally gaining access to the full potential of his curse technique. This moment is Satoru Gojo accepting his role as an Ubermensch, embracing both the limitless strength and the loneliness that such a role entails. Satoru's acceptance of isolation would go on to create a rift between him and his best friend, eventually leading that person to go down a dark path as a curse user. Suguru Geto is perhaps the most influential person in Satoru's life. The two were inseparable in Jujutsu High, and both were put on a pedestal above most of their peers as young special grade sorcerers. However, while the pair seemed to be two of a kind from an outside perspective, they could not be more different. Suguru Geto exhibits a similar path of evolution to that of the Ubermensch. As the camel, he serves Jujutsu High without a second thought, vowing to protect the weak and undergoing the torment of consuming curses, all the while friends and comrades around him die on the front lines before even exiting their teen years. Following the mission to retrieve the Star Plasma Vessel, Suguru grows disenfranchised of the world of curses, and his conversation with Yuki Tsukumo, as well as his visit to the village, causes him to walk down the path of a lion. He vows to annihilate curses through eliminating their root cause, humans without cursed energy. Through this act of genocide, the war between Jujutsu sorcerers and curses would end, and no one would be forced into the same torturous subjugation that he experienced as a sorcerer. Interestingly, this is where Suguru's development forever stagnates. Where we see him again is in Jujutsu Kaisen 0. His goals and motivations have not changed at all. He is still trying to kill all non-sorcerers out of rage and resentment. He dresses in religious garbs and carries himself as a messiah, but all of that masks the fact that Suguru's actions are motivated by the trauma he experienced as a teenager. As Suguru was never able to let go of his pain and his hatred, he could never embody the innocence of the child. Suguru also equates this inability to let go of his attachments to the limits of his power. At the end of Hidden Inventory, Suguru remarks that while they are both powerful, Satoru's abilities simply eclipse his, and he has strength that could change the world if he so wished. After his defeat at the hands of Yuta and Rika, Suguru envies Yuta for bearing a curse stronger than his. Suguru's last words to Satoru finally bring this whole idea together. He tells Satoru that he could never have been truly happy in the world they were born in, so he spent his life trying to embrace a hatred in an attempt to find fulfillment. Suguru Geto was not all-powerful. He was not able to let go of that which held back his evolution, and because of that, he could never know the freedom of the Ubermensch. Whereas Satoru Gojo was destined to become an Honoured One, Suguru Geto was cursed to never reach that peak. The reason why Satoru was so close with Suguru was because he thought that the two of them were alike, and that through that likeness, he could find someone capable of understanding him. Satoru, who lived a life of disconnection from those weaker than him, craved companionship and sought that through Suguru. However, during their final conversation in the Hidden Inventory arc, this illusion shatters. Satoru was born different from other humans, and that unfortunately included Suguru. When Suguru finally understands this, he ponders on what someone like Satoru would think of his identity, which is when he posits this question.
Do you think you're the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest?
This question makes Satoru question everything about his life. Whilst other strong people worked hard to try and reach a state in which they could be like Satoru Gojo himself wanted something different. He was born already on the other side, and despite his spirit already having seemed perfect, he still found dissatisfaction in that. To be Satoru Gojo means to have an infinite space separating you from your peers. This infinity is both torturous in its isolation and necessary for unparalleled strength. As for what the answer to this question is, I don't really think it has an answer. It's a what came first, the chicken or the egg type of question. Both strength and loneliness are key to the Ubermensch, so figuring out which quality stems from the other is an exercise in futility. In part 1, I claimed that Satoru Gojo was a man who preached master morality, yet practiced slave morality, being openly rebellious in the way that he carries himself, all the while still restraining himself from actually revolting, despite having the power to do so. I'd like to make a short addendum to that statement. While I do think that Satoru Gojo practices slave morality at the start of the story, I don't believe he puts up a facade of practicing master morality. When he talks to Ijichi about wanting to reset the Jujutsu world, Satoru makes the point that using his strength forcefully on the higher-ups would only trigger controversy, and eventually, other similarly corrupt individuals would take their place. This scene is Satoru showing what he learned from Suguru when he threatens to kill the members of the Time Vessel Association. For Satoru, Acting as a master would be pointless, as his strength is so detached from that of his peers he wouldn't cause any long-lasting change. Satoru killing the higher-ups and usurping Jujutsu society would be equivalent to a kind of alien takeover. It would exist only to breed resentment towards Satoru, and after his death, the world would simply reset to what it once was. It is implied that this happened with Ryomen Sukuna during his reign in the Heian era. Sukuna bent Jujutsu society to his will, albeit with far more malicious intent. However, following his death, the world of Jujutsu would once again fester weakness and bureaucracy. Therefore, Satoru decides to turn to teaching his students Jujutsu High in an effort to forge a new generation of sorcerers stronger than him. To be clear, when I say stronger than him, I don't mean in a literal material way. Rather, I believe that Satoru's idea of a person stronger than him is a person who is strong in a completely different way to him. That being, someone who is strong but not alone. Satoru's approach to teaching his students is rather hands-off, involving mostly outer field work in which his students learn from each other as opposed to him. Though this is sometimes due to how busy Satoru is as a sorcerer, Satoru even practices this method during his first session with Nobara Kugisaki, when he sends her to defeat a Tokyo curse with Yuji. As a result of this methodology, Satoru's students are routinely shown to be able to coordinate and understand each other on a level that allows them to continually surpass their own individual and collective limits. While Satoru fought Sukuna alone, as solitude is the core essence of his strength, his students were able to unite under a coalition that managed to accomplish a feat that he could not, defeating the King of Curses. Though his students could unite with each other, they could not reach through the infinity that separated them from their mentor. Satoru even says as much in chapter 236. You can plant a flower, you can admire it, but you can't tell that flower I want you to understand me. Satoru loved his students, but he would not make the same mistake with them as he did with Suguru. He would not let them try to walk down his path only to crash and burn in the process. Satoru even expresses this thought to Yuji in the final chapter of the series, explaining how he'd rather be forgotten so that his students could move on and attain strength completely divorced from his own. This is why Satoru Gojo is not given a funeral at the end of the series. He wasn't a human whose loss would be mourned, but a pillar which the future generation could build upon and grow beyond. It wouldn't be until the end of his life where Satoru Gojo would finally find another soul who could understand him, one who had made the climb atop the mountain of solitude which Satoru stood on. To understand the dynamics of Satoru Gojo versus Ryomen Sukuna, we must first cast our minds back to Sukuna's fight with Yorozu. During the chaos of the Heian era, the majority of man-made dynasties fell at the feet of various powerful Jujutsu sorcerers. We see in a flashback in chapter 218 that among those Jujutsu sorcerers were Yorozu, and especially Ryomen Sukuna. Both the sorcerers were made nobles based on strength and fear alone, and the latter even had citizens host festivals and ceremonies where they worship him as a deity to prevent further conflict with the king. Yorozu was motivated to go to one of these festivals, and upon seeing Sukuna on his pedestal, she quickly became obsessed with him, or at least the parts of him that she knew she could relate to. Like Sukuna, Yorozu had gone down the path of the Ubermensch, choosing a path of solitude in exchange for a glorious evolution. Though this allowed her to satisfy all of her day-to-day needs, Yorozu would eventually grow lonely on her pedestal. In Sukuna, she saw another soul who made the same choices as her and grew lonely as a result. From then on, she decided that she would solve the pair's loneliness through love. At first, Yorozu had assumed that Sukuna denied her advances out of ignorance of the value that love could provide him. However, she discovers during their fight that Sukuna knew all about love, and yet chose to deny it in favour of solitude as the strongest. We see this confirmed later during his fight with Kashimo Hajime. Kashimo was an Edo period sorcerer who had also evolved his spirit to embody the Ubermensch. During his time period, his strength and will were unrivaled, yet all he found on his path of transcendence was depression in his isolation. Kashimo would travel across time periods to find Sukuna, another Ubermensch who could perhaps teach him of a path that would grant him satisfaction and cure his loneliness. However, Sukuna's answer was not what he was expecting. Sukuna chastised Kashimo and called him greedy for being dissatisfied with the solitude granted by unparalleled strength. Many fierce fighters must have challenged you with all their strength and physical might, but they never cursed you. They wanted your recognition so that you could know their worth, but you butchered them all the while wondering how to treat others with care. If that isn't loving kindness, then what is? Others love us for our strength, and we respond to that love. Yet solitude troubles you? That's why I called you greedy. Sukuna's strength and accolades earned him a throne in the Heian era that even his enemies respected. No one strong enough to challenge Sukuna cursed him from beyond the grave due to that respect. Sukuna has lived a millennium knowing that he is stronger, more respected, and more feared than any other being. Any life form he perceives as lower than him should not be necessary to satisfy himself. Therefore, he is content to live seeking material joy, following natural impulse to natural impulse until somehow he dies. Notably, Kashimo doesn't appear satisfied with that answer. His last words asking the King of Curses' ways will ever get old, while scoffing. Kashimo also brings up a brilliant point against Sukuna's argument. If Sukuna is satisfied with his life, why the need to continue living it, even to the point of turning his own body into cursed objects to transcend natural death? Sukuna chooses not to answer this directly, instead continuing to explain what he believes satisfies him. Sukuna's beliefs are also contingent on him continuing to remain an undisputed king, even saying to Yorozu that if he were to lose to her, his being would merely become a corpse. Sukuna spent his entire life surrounded by people weaker than him, people who had not gone as far down the path of embracing the Ubermensch as he had. On the 24th of December 2018, he would finally come face to face with Satoru Gojo, a man who had spent his entire life unwillingly embodying the Ubermensch. This man would be the first to instill carnal fear into Sukuna in a millennium, the first person whose strength threatened to rival his, and the first person capable of invalidating his entire worldview. Several times during their fight, Sukuna would be reminded of a snapshot of Yorozu's words, implying that he believed that the one who could teach him about love and a life beyond loneliness was Satoru Gojo. We learn at the end of their fight that Satoru used all of his power in an attempt to get through to Sukuna, to teach him that a man with the ability to choose isolation in exchange for unlimited potential should not do so, to express that Satoru Gojo, a man born with the perfection that Sukuna had dedicated his life to obtaining, was ultimately unfulfilled by said perfection. What should be noted about Nietzsche's teachings of the Ubermensch is that while it is a proposed ideal for humanity to strive for, it is only that and nothing more. The Ubermensch is a path one can take, it is not truly achievable. Our minds and bodies are not static, we will peak and trough at various points in our lives, and to think that we can pursue any kind of permanent endgame is wishful thinking at best. Those who we have thus far assumed to have achieved Ubermensch status still retain distinct weaknesses. Kashimo grows disenfranchised with being number one in his era and attempts to transcend time for an answer that would never satisfy him. Yorozu grows a disorderly affection towards Sukuna in an attempt to find companionship. And Sukuna, well, we know from his conversation with Kashimo that there may be more chinks in his armour than meets the eye. The reason Sukuna remains unchallenged philosophically throughout the series is that Sukuna's own belief system is contingent on his overwhelming strength. Sukuna offers his entire being to Yorozu in the event that he loses, because he knows that if the perfection he found as an Ubermensch could be defeated, that perfection was a lie, and his entire belief system would crumble. Because Sukuna never lost, and rarely even got close to losing, he developed this idea that losing was an impossibility, and that his own pursuit of ravenous desire was something others should strive for. Nietzsche's idea of the Ubermensch, alongside other philosophical endpoints, have historically been misinterpreted and fetishized, creating this false idea that human nature is perfectible. However, this is not the case. True perfection is unachievable in real life just as it is in Jujutsu Kaisen. It is not Sukuna's cannibalistic desires nor his callous personality that the story challenges in making him the main antagonist. Instead, it is Sukuna's absolutist morality and belief in a life of perpetual indulgence that is being questioned. We discussed in part 1 how Yuji and Megumi routinely suppress the darker parts of their nature in an attempt to adhere to outside pressures. This repression of their shadows would cause emotions such as rage and resentment to bottle up, leading to disastrous consequences like what happened in Shibuya. However, had Yuji and Megumi fed into their shadows without inhibition, the destruction the two could cause would likely have been far worse. Those who allow themselves to be constrained as slaves, and those who choose to conquer as masters, are equally capable of horrific misdeeds. Unfortunately, As Satoru lost his fight with Sukuna, these messages would have yet to make it through to the King of Curses. However, despite his failure, despite the long hard years of isolation and misunderstanding that Satoru endured, he died with no regrets, without the need to be understood, the need to win every battle, or the need to be perfect. Instead, Satoru Gojo found something more fulfilling than any of that. But I will leave an explanation of that topic for the final part of this video series. Thank you for reaching the conclusion of this analysis. If you want to support my channel and help my videos reach a larger audience, please consider liking the video, leaving a comment, or sharing. If you're interested in my content and wish to see more, I'd suggest subscribing and clicking the bell icon to be notified about future uploads. If you haven't already, you can check out my first video on Jujutsu Kaisen, linked in the description of this video. As for my next upload, I'm going to be briefly pivoting away from JJK in favour of another manga series, but if you've liked these last two videos, I'm sure you'll still enjoy this next one. I know my videos aren't quite up to standard in terms of production and writing yet, but I plan on continuing to improve and iterate on my work as time goes on and the channel grows. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again next video.